Hello and welcome to Clean Chemicals with me, Aaron Lee. Now, today's episode is slightly different as I'm joined by Fiona Scott, founder of Scott Media. Now, Fiona began her career in journalism, spending the majority of that with ITV before transitioning into PR and media consultancy. So, for the last decade plus now, she's helped businesses craft compelling stories, navigate the world of media, and manage their reputations. So, Fiona, thank you very much for coming on.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me, Aaron. You've made me sound very grand.
Good, good. So before we get really into it, I wonder if you could share a little bit about your journey into journalism, into media consultancy, and the motivations for that transition.
I actually wanted to be a journalist from my teenage years. I told my mum that, and she said, "Oh, you'll never manage to do that. You're far too sensitive." So I trained to be a teacher. I hated it beyond belief, and it was that loathing for that profession that made me apply for lots and lots of jobs around journalism, PR, basically storytelling. And I got a traineeship to work for Westminster Press, which was a newspaper group at the time, and then had a great time. And was a newspaper journalist for 7 years, transitioned into TV for 13 years, and would have stayed there forever. Unfortunately, a lot of us were made redundant, and I had a decision to make with a young family and decided to become a media consultant and PR specialist. Still do a bit of work in journalism today, but to me, it's all the same. It's storytelling. The only difference is who pays the bill.
Okay. Um, Now, and I was probably guilty of this when we first spoke, but I would say many people and or businesses don't quite understand how media really works. And I know you're quite vocal about the stories that the media are interested in versus the stories that people kind of want to say about themselves. So I wonder how you help people, clients shape their stories in a way that meets I guess what the journalists are looking for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that business people, by and large, will go one of two ways. They will tell stories in a really salesy way, so that it's not a story, it's more like a sales pitch all the time, or they will hide away from doing that. They will think they have nothing interesting to say. Both are equally delusional, to be honest. The media are interested in people stories, day to day, the ebb and flow of the year. They're interested in news. Therefore, sales copy is not suitable for dealing with the media. So we might need to learn how to do that for our website or for our email marketing, or if we're pitching at a networking group or something like that. But you have to learn a whole different language and discipline when you're dealing with the media, if the media is part of your PR strategy, because PR is 100 different tools that you can use. And the media is just one of those tools. I happen to specialize in that bit, but you don't have to do that. For other businesses, other things could be more important and more beneficial.
Okay. Now, I mean, one of the major reasons I wanted to talk to you was that the chemical industry faces a lot of bad press, sort of stereotypes, stigmas. I mean, a lot of that self-inflicted, of course. You know, if we think about things like forever chemicals and well, I mean, toxic chemicals, uh, allergens in foods, kids using underage using makeups and things. It all grabs headlines, but often, though not always, of course, these things kind of get taken out of context. So, I mean, what advice would you have for companies trying to address particularly fears and misconceptions when, I mean, a lot of these things are quite bed in now. So, as I say, chemicals has got this stigma against it now.
I You're quite right. And with the advent of social media, which is another tool of the media, these things can spread really quickly. I think that the most helpful thing is that the chemical industry needs to consider how the media works. And the media works like this, in that good news is very, very common. And therefore, if you don't shout about your good news and share your good news, how will the media know about it? Bad news, on the other hand, makes the public domain very, very quickly. It always has done, but with the dawn of social media, it's almost instant now. So what that means in practice is that if a bad news situation occurs, like, I don't know, a toxic spill of a chemical, that is going to involve authorities, I don't know, police, fire service, I don't know, health and safety executive, environment agency, and all of those bodies are publicly funded with publicly money, and they're publicly accountable. So they have to tell the media in one way or another what they are up to. And then you add the added ingredient of social media, people seeing things, taking pictures on their phones, sharing it, even if they don't really understand what they're sharing. So things become public very quickly. Bad news becomes public very quickly. It's hard to hide it. And therefore, once you understand that, you start to understand that you need to share your good news, because it has to shout a lot louder to be heard. And many companies, chemical industry is no exception to many other sectors, sit there and blame the media, but they never actually do anything to share that good news. And generally, sadly, when good news does emerge, often with the national press and sometimes with local press, the front page news will be something that's highly clickable. Therefore, it's what we might often call blue light stories, crime stories, or stories that are extremely unusual. And therefore, yes, they get more clicks, they get more likes, they create more traction. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be sharing good news stories. I focus heavily, 95% of the stories I send out are good news stories. The crisis management side is a really small part of what I do, and probably 3 or 4 times a year that'll be something that consumes my time. And I'm a backwater journalist, just in Swindon. If you multiply me thousands of times, so it's about understanding this is how the media works, this is how news works, this is how we respond to news as human beings. Therefore, good news has to be shouted about to be heard. You can't expect us journalists to sit down and into the ether and it just cyclically arrives and we know about it. We need to be told.
So it is sort of as simple as that. Just, I guess, regular communication, regular
Yeah,
publication of good news stories as well. So that I suppose if and when an inevitable bad story happens, you have enough, I guess, kudos, credence built up over the months, years of positive media to kind of fall back on.
that's right. And you need to deal with negative news in a healthier way as you can. If you know as a company that you've got bad news coming, you've got to deal with it head on. And you've got to, the two ways I describe it, and it's often very common in PR, is you acknowledge and you act. So usually in those circumstances, it's something generic that's bad news, whether within your sector or within your company. But it's not your fault. There are probably other factors involved that have nothing to do with you. So that's acknowledge that there's something and then act what you're going to do about it. And the one where you are at fault is having the ability internally to admit, acknowledge, and act and show empathy. And for really bad news stories, it's important to do that for the future health of a company and for their recruitment and retention. Because future staff, particularly younger people like you, Aaron, and people coming behind you, it matters to them more and more the ethics of the people that they work for. And they will walk away or not bother to apply for jobs if you don't, face these things head on. You make things much worse for yourself if you try and cover things up, because sooner or later it will come out. A recent example of that is the post office scandal. I know it's not to do with chemicals, the post office scandal. The journalist who first broke that story got the OBE this year, Rebecca. She wrote about that story 20 years ago almost in Computer Weekly, where a certain sector saw it. And it took that time and then a TV documentary to make it slam into the mainstream media, even though it's all been going on behind the scenes, and the repercussions of the power of TV, really. But, it started quietly many years ago. It's been there a long time. So if you think you're safe because you're covering something up that's happened many, many years ago, you're not. You're just building up something that will implode spectacularly badly at some point.
Okay, so would encourage people to kind of get ahead of it rather than sit and wait for the flag?
Yeah, I would. I really, really would. And I can't think of any circumstances where you wouldn't do that. Perhaps if you're a government department or there's some kind of national security issue and there are particular laws around the media around national security, perhaps. But in almost all other cases, you need to be upfront about it because it just becomes toxic. It creates rot. We've seen it with various religions over the years. Um, with the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England, and that is still going on like 20 years after the first major story was done by the Boston Globe. The film about that is called Spotlight, if anyone's interested. But there are these stories, and there are stories around chemicals where films have been made about chemicals. Erin Brockovich, going back to that story many years ago. You know, don't if there's something bad coming, um, get ahead of it and be prepared for it, and be as caring and compassionate and empathetic, and put your hands up if you're in the wrong, because the sooner you do that, um, the better the outcome will be, even in a really bad situation.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds logical to me. I know that that's not quite how a lot of people think, though. I think perhaps they try and skate around it or hope the problem goes away, stick their head in the sand, you name it. So to go back to kind of on the more positive side
Yeah.
of media and things, and although this is kind of slightly convoluted, but one of the major issues with chemicals, be it cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, even food, is that the rules and regulations are very complicated and detailed, and there is no way the average consumer can look into all the detail for everything they are consuming. Like if you think about your shampoo bottle, you look on the back of that, there's might be 50 ingredients in it. I mean, I wouldn't even be able to tell you what the majority of those do, and I'm in it day to day for more than a decade. So, and I think it's more prevalent with cosmetics at the moment because there's a lot of, rightly so, a lot of media attention around the damage that some cosmetics products can do if they're used by the wrong people. So I wonder if there's in Europe, because this might be, well, I'm sure it's applicable in different industries, is how to communicate nuanced information like the safe use of chemicals or what to look out for in a product, whatever that may be, to a public that's probably pretty wary of those products now.
Oh gosh, do you know, that's a huge question, but you can do it, and it comes down to brands or manufacturing companies or the elements of that supply chain to think about, okay, where are people bad mouthing us or sharing these negative stories, and how do we counter that? So if we say it's on TikTok, for example, where you get a lot of people talking about, I use this product and my lips swelled up or something like that. Okay. Um, if you can't see a way of getting your point across, then create it. So you become a TikTok influencer talking about this. What you can't do with complex subjects these days is record a film that's like an encyclopedia, or here's an act of parliament and the 300 billion things we can say about this. Don't do that. Break it down into bite-sized chunks. Here's my TikTok channel where every day someone from my company is going to share one piece of information about this product or this chemical element of a product, and have a plan. Podcasts like you're doing is a really good way of doing that. It counterbalances in almost any controversial subject where you can talk to, say, one guest, or you can share your own expertise at some length. I'd say 15 to 20 minutes max, really, talking around these issues and dispelling myths. and maybe dealing head on with, I don't know, fake products or things being used that are coming from nefarious or dark places, which actually negatively impact on products that are good. What makes a product good? You know, how important it is to follow instructions for the use of a product, why you shouldn't use it if it isn't suitable for you. Um, and also sharing the good that chemicals do. Um, there are loads of things we take for granted. I mean, even sat here at my desk, almost everything around me will have been created by a chemical component, as you have taught me. We don't think about those things, but people don't just arrive and suddenly think about them. We have to educate and show them and commit budget to that. And that's the thing. If you are always just thinking of bottom lines and margins and, it must go into research and development, yeah, that's great. That has its place. Of course it does. But if you don't educate people alongside it, when a big story breaks that you've got a product that's massively impacted by it, or your shares start to go down in value, then you are going to have to spend a lot more to climb up that mountain and redress that balance. So spend some time doing that and find the personalities within the chemical business or your brand who are willing to share that kind and enjoy it. Because if you are a chemist, for example, or a techie person who doesn't enjoy being out there, that's going to communicate itself straight away. Straight away. So you need the people that are passionate about chemicals and are willing to talk about it. And, can pick up something and saying, right, here's my pen. The three major chemicals of that are this, this, and this. Let me tell you about this. And then next week I'll tell you about that. You can break these down into subject matter and employ marketing positively. What happens then over time, not instantly, is you become um, over a period of time an influencer in that sector. So journalists then can find you. So when that negative story that emerges about chemicals in pens, um, and journalists do searches on the internet, just like we all do, they're going to find the chemical pen expert talking about the pens. And they think, oh, great, because journalists in the UK, and I'm not sure about other countries, but in the UK, they have a duty of care to be as balanced as possible. They have to show that they've tried to find all sensible sides of an argument. Now, that is not an open-ended thing. They don't have to try forever and ever. But if they can't find you because you never actually educate and you just sit quietly in groups moaning and groaning, then they have fulfilled their legal commitment and their commitment to actually finding the other side of the story. So if you can't be found, you're really in no position to complain.
Yeah, it's. I think the chemical industry is certainly sort of set in its ways into. There are a lot of faceless businesses. Um, there are signs of that changing in some pockets, but certainly none of the giants really, I would say, are very actively out there. There are you get a lot of sort of CEOs of the giants that do the usual, like quarterly addresses and annual addresses and things, but you do have to search quite hard to find those educators, and again, it's industry specific. So I think in places like food and beverage, cosmetics, more consumer brands, you see it a lot more. But if you wanted
Mm.
to go into industrial sectors like paints, adhesives, lubricants, I mean, I don't know that you'd be able to find anyone who is willingly out there trying to educate. Maybe there's not an audience for it. I don't know. I'm sure there is. There's an audience for everything, but
There is an audience for everything. I mean, um, how many times do I see influencers run it on Facebook or YouTube doing unblocking drains? Unblocking drains, okay? Now, who would have thought that anyone would sit and watch films of people every day unblocking drains? But they do. I mean, who would have thought a TV program, series about people watching TV,
true.
Gogglebox,
Yeah.
would ever be successful? You don't know until you try.
Yeah.
Um, And even if your audience is small, it's not always about quantity. Quite often it's about quality. You know, you might get one mover or shaker who's watched your YouTube channel, of which you've got 100 subscribers, um, but they can make a big impact. So I don't think it's chasing the numbers, it's chasing the education. It's showing to be different. It's showing that you want to be more transparent. And the key area where I think that's going to be more and more important in the future when new laws will definitely come into place is around sustainability.
We've actually kind of preempted my next question because something I mean we've spoken about previously is around greenwashing and sustainability, and the chemical industry is absolutely a key contributor to emissions and things like that. You know, it's such a wide spider web of industry, and it's a really complex issue too. And I think one of the major issues I see with a lot of companies is that sustainability isn't something that you kind of complete. There's no holy grail of sustainability, to my knowledge. So I guess how can companies maintain credibility while still being on a journey towards sustainability?
By honesty and transparency and making it clear that they are on that journey, um, and marking the milestones of that journey to show progress. I mean, in the past, when we use the word green, when I started out 17 years ago in PR, um, people thought they could plant a few trees and that was all right. Well, we're more educated and nuanced about that now, and the law is going to change because of climate change. And younger people, this is very important for them, for their futures, and for the future of my children and my grandchildren. So all of us have to think about it. And that boils down to the consumer in their house doing more recycling, making wiser choices about what they buy. And this will trickle up to bigger companies because, you know, every company somewhere along the line is reliant upon consumer demand somewhere. There has got to be a demand for their product. So we are culpable as consumers in what we consume. And if we start to change our behaviours, that will go up the supply chain. And then the law will come in at the top of the supply chain, and that will percolate down. So you're going to get a perfect storm. And if you are not showing you're on a journey to net zero, that could have serious implications for the value of your company, for the value of your brand, for retention of staff. So you have to start working on it now. But it is not, I'll have an audit, I'll tick these 10 boxes and I'm now sustainable. That's impossible. Like you say, it's impossible because it's going to be an ever moving formula over time. Of course it is, as things change. So it's about being transparent. So if I was working with a chemical company, and I don't work with one, but if I was, the first thing I would be doing is getting a real credible audit of their whole operation, and that would be quite a task. Um, I would also want them to consider a whole life cycle of any product. It's not just what you do within your business and your premises, it's what happens when it leaves your premises and goes somewhere else, and what happens to it then, and what happens to it when it's no good and it's in where you need to consider the life cycle of the product. And then you need to chart the journey and take your team with you because it will take time and it will take investment. And then when you reach milestones, talk about it. So that might be a simple press release to your local community if you're a really small business. It might be out to a sector press. It might be national if you're a FTSE 100 company. It could be a combination of those things, but it could be on your social media. It could be internal comms or at conferences. And also learn from others who are doing things better than you or are further along than you. But you're going to have to talk about it because sooner or later, if you aren't doing these things, you'll be dropped from your supply chain for people that are doing it. So if you get ahead of it now, it's something you have to invest for the future. ESG is going to become bigger. It was called CSR at one point, and then environmental net zero is a separate thing. Now it's ESG. I'm sure in 5 years' time it'll be called something else. But it's all the same journey. We're all on it, whether we're individuals or whether we are massive big corporations. And people will also start to ask more nuanced questions. So when you talked about the ingredients on the back of a shampoo bottle, where most of us don't know it, over time, even that will change, I think. And labelling will have to become more nuanced. And then there'll have to be visit our website or scan this QR code to find out even more about this particular chemical or that particular thing. So consumers will get more and more educated about what they're doing. And also what you'll get is brands, and it's already starting to happen, brands that claim they are, I don't know, toxic chemical free, because you're competing alongside those. They'll come along slowly and then they'll grow and grow and grow because they'll be perceived as being better. They might not be better, but they'll make that part of their marketing strategy. So it's about taking someone on the journey with you and investing in that sort of education, being more visible, and being uncomfortable in a way that, I mean, I know from working for you, I mean, we're not embarrassed for chemical magazines out there, are we? Or for, there's a few. Um, and, over time, it would be good if some of this news became more mainstream news and moved more into the mainstream rather than just the sector press.
Yeah, I think there's a certain element of it can be quite a dry subject and topic area. What again, and I'm going back to cosmetics. I can't remember the name of the brand now. I'm not deliberately not mentioning them. They had a really good initiative because packaging is another one which is really prevalent in things like cosmetics, but also things like food and beverage too. Reusing packaging, but also upcycling of ingredients and things. So this one particular brand had on the back of their packaging contain 79% upcycled ingredients, and I thought, great, that's really good. 2 points to that though: the average consumer, I mean, a lot maybe don't care, a lot do, but also they won't know what that strictly means. And then the other thing you've got to consider is, all right, okay, it's upcycled, but what are the impacts of that, the products that are being upcycled? Because there is some ambiguity around when you're recycling a product, how horrendous that product was before it was recycled. So what you talk about, the life cycle assessments is really key and important, because you've got to go so far backwards down the chain to really get a full picture of the complete impact of the products, the raw materials to make the products, the packaging, the distance they're traveling, the power generated, wastewater, how you're recycling finished products. And yeah, it's so complex.
It is complex, but our planet is complex. And, and we have to consider these things because our planet is important. And our consumer behaviour has had negative over hundreds of years, but particularly from the sort of Victorian era, the industrial era, has had massive negative effects on the planet. And therefore, this is not something we're going to simply click our fingers and deal with. But what am I trying to say here, Aaron? I'm just trying to say, start on the journey. Don't try and solve all the problems all at once, because it's a massive problem to solve. But the alternative is, so if you take the sort of arguments that go on about electric cars and damage that batteries do, where they come from, and I've had that thrown. I've got an electric car, and I've had that thrown at me many times. That isn't very environmentally friendly. Well, we've all got to start somewhere. We've all got to start somewhere, because that allows us to be complacent and to not make any change. I know that my car really needs to be driven for about 10 years to have a sort of more of a net zero effect on the environment. But I also know that driving around Swindon today or in the Midlands yesterday means that I have not put any carbon into the atmosphere from my car. And that makes me feel good. And it's those type of things that will start to change. Even our technologies to become more green won't always be totally green. But does that mean we shouldn't move forward? Otherwise, we're just sitting back saying, oh, well, we don't make any difference, or the biggest polluters are those, so we won't do anything. And soon we're all doing that and nothing changes. So no, there isn't any perfect solution to any of this. We just have to move forward. We've moved forward, I believe, with the ozone layer. You'll know more than me, than where we were. And we can move forward in these ways too. But if you're too purist about it, or you get lethargic about it and you think, oh, it's just too massive a problem to deal with, so I won't bother, I'll wait until I'm forced. Well, if everyone does that, then, we're a self-fulfilling prophecy of destruction, of climate change, of sea levels rising, of floods. And, so I just think we need to make small positive steps and understand that, yes, they are small, but they're still steps forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right with what you say about electric cars. We're not at the final. Again, like I said earlier, it's not. You don't complete sustainability. It doesn't feel like so. Okay, lithium batteries might not be majority lithium might not be the answer, but it's one step closer to a better solution to the problem of emissions from vehicles. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Now, to think about kind of more practical tips for PR, I suppose. Now, since I've known you, you've always emphasized the power of local media.
Mm.
Now, with the chemical industry, however, is not a very local business in that, I mean, my supply chain over the years, I've worked across the globe. It's very rare that I work sort of locally. So I wonder how I could say so there's a big chemical company down the road from me. How could they leverage the power of local media for their own advantage?
Okay. I hear that a lot. I'm a chemical company. Oh, I can work internationally. Well, I can work internationally and globally too, as long as we speak the same language. And I could probably work with someone if I had an interpreter, no matter where they were. No. So what you have to think is the media are interested in people first. Every business has people, even if that's one person. So with the chemical company you're referring to, where do all the people live that work within that business? Well, I bet a lot of them live in the Oxfordshire, Wiltshire, Gloucestershire area within maybe. So they are a local company doing things in a local community. They might expand and work globally, but that's where you start. You start where your people are based. Now, if you are a company that's got several bases, say one in the UK, one in America, maybe one, I don't know, somewhere else, Australia. I'm making this up. Let's just say it's Australia. You then have 3 local bases, employing 3 sets of local people, which in my mind is 3 media lists, all that have a different media sort of landscape. So I know, for example, that in Australia it's much easier to get national press because it's not so densely populated and it's easier to reach the national press. We live in a small island where it's harder to get to the national press. In America, it's harder to get to the national press, but it's such a vast country that you will have local, regional, state press, and then national press. So different layers of press. So you can leverage all those different media lists based upon those 3 localities. And then it might be you've got a member of staff who's attained something amazing. Let's just say, for argument's sake, it's a Nobel Peace Prize. Your company's based in Oxfordshire and they live in the Midlands, the West Midlands. Well, that's another media list because you can tell the same story and just say they live in the West Midlands. You don't have to put their street address in, but that's where they come from. But they work with this Oxfordshire-based company. So it's people. When you talk about the media, generally you think about people first, product and brand later. And actually, people are integral to every business. They're really important in every business. And if you celebrate the positive news of your people, good things will happen. They'll happen internally within the business and externally when it comes to brand awareness and profile.
Yeah, I think one thing I always wonder is, and I think that kind of answers it, is that a lot of so one reason to launch this podcast was to try and shine a light on a lot of the amazing people out there that are doing research, developing some pretty incredible technologies and chemistries, or looking to change the way, if we're honest, a pretty old and stale industry has worked for a long time, but to do it from the inside out. And the issue, which I kind of touched on earlier, I think is that chemicals can be quite dry. So I guess correct me if I'm wrong, what we're saying is really forget about the technology almost to a certain extent, talk about the person, and allow the technology to kind of come through as an almost secondary talking point.
Yeah. And also, don't forget that there are children coming through at school that we want to go on, a portion of them, to become the chemists and the innovators of the future. Therefore, doesn't the industry have a responsibility to be more exciting and more engaging so that those young people who've been brought up in a technological world, who will be engaging on social media, probably far younger than they really should be, but let's just say, for argument's sake, from the age of 13, and they aren't seeing the chemists of this world out there doing stuff and achieving stuff. Occasionally they'll see something. You need to inspire these young people to choose chemistry when they get to, in the UK, at GCSE level, or if they're international baccalaureate, to choose it as one of their key subjects and go forward, and they'll be the innovators and the scientists of the future. But you can't be what you can't see, and that holds true for the chemical industry as it does for every other sector. So there almost is a moral responsibility to keep the health of the industry going by meeting young people where they are today and how they receive their news today. You know, my son, if I say to him, what do you want for Christmas? He's most likely to ask me for merch from some YouTuber I've never heard of. Because their sense of what is celebrity and what is interesting is different to a woman like me who's, pushing 60. I mean, it's a whole different world. And those that are stuck in the past, you will be overtaken by more innovative things coming forward. And if you want to inspire a new generation to see being a chemist or into the chemical industry in whatever discipline, as a place to be in the future, engineering, chemical engineering, whatever it might be, then you have to show these young people that this is an industry to aim for, to go for, to inspire. So I love it that you're doing this podcast, because we need to see these people.
Yeah, it is really interesting, and it's something I found. There's quite a lot of white space out there in the chemical industry for these sorts of things. I mean, obviously launching my own business and then trying to read up on best practices and whatnot, and sort of even on LinkedIn there was this big thing about how you've got to go out and engage and comment on other posts and whatever to boost your engagement. And I thought, that's all well and good, but I can't find any. I can't find anyone to engage with. So it was just sort of me on my own, sort of shouting out to everyone to talk about chemicals. Oh, well, the supply chain in particular. So yeah, and even with the podcast, again, it was really, there must be out there, but I haven't found any that have really gained much traction. So yeah, hopefully it can fill that void.
I think, yeah, if you can't see it, you need to think about creating it. How important is it really to wider society? How passionate you are, and then create it. And don't focus on, oh, only 5 people have viewed that today, or oh, only 10 people. Because if you start thinking like that, you'll stop. And you'll never grow, and you'll never get to the 1,000 views in a day, or 10,000 views, or 1,000,000 views. You're never going to get there if you don't actually take that out of your mind and think, no, I'm doing a thing for the greater good of my sector, for the greater good of my life, for the greater good of my children and my grandchildren, by talking about this stuff, highlighting the bad bits, definitely highlighting the good bits. And showing this is an industry that is important across all society, that has its downsides, it has its dark sides, it has its light sides, but it's still important. It will continue to be important. It will evolve, and we need people coming into the industry.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Now, before I close, I wonder how you see PR evolving over the next few years, especially with things like AI now coming in and becoming more and more prevalent. My own suspicion is that, even with my own industry, is that you cannot take away that human element, talking and communicating. Yeah, it will speed up things in the background, but I feel like the same with PR. The person is so important, the face is so important, and that's something I've learned a lot over the last 20 months is, however uncomfortable it may be sometimes, I have to keep putting my face out there all the time to put a face to my business.
Yeah. I think AI is actually a technology that's been around for ages. It's been evolving and it will evolve really rapidly, and it can offer some amazing things. Time saving things, efficiencies, and in certain sectors, probably life changing. And it's exciting, it's overwhelming. Um, But when you think about how it can be applied to the way we communicate now, or new generations communicate, it's amazing. I can talk to someone in America easily. I mean, when I was growing up, that was just beyond comprehension. I mean, you sat in the hall with a phone in the hall. Even mobile phones were like carrying around a breeze block. I mean, technology has moved on so much. And I think largely that's to be embraced. And even if we don't embrace it, it's happening whether we like it or not. However, I think what it will actually do is make human interaction more important, not less. So I think the human factor will become more valuable. I think creativity, imagination will become more valuable than ever, and the creative sectors will grow, and basically we'll end up charging more money. Because if you've got 20 chemical companies out there using AI to create vanilla beige content that's all roughly the same, because they're using the same search parameters, maybe using different AI voices, then other AI is going to pick that up and they're not going to show it to anyone. So the people that are willing to stand up and be different, stand up and show personality, will stand out more than ever. Give it 10 years, you wait and see. So I just think personality, creativity, imagination, being unafraid to be out there will become more important, not less.
Perfect. Well, finally, if people want to learn more about you and your business, how can they do that?
Uh, well, I get around, so you can find my website, scottmedia.uk. I've got quite a lot of stuff on there. I am on LinkedIn, Fiona Scott, so please link up with me there. Or if there's a specific question you want to ask me, I'm at fiona@fionascott.co.uk. I'm on Facebook. I'm on a little bit on TikTok. I play with that a little bit. Yeah, most spaces you're going to find me whittering on about something.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Fiona, for joining me and for all your insights. Really, really interesting.
Oh, thanks very much, Aaron.